Much of the Western Christian discourse regarding death and suffering is governed by the assumption of a pervasive, autonomous cosmic adversary. This assumption shapes the interpretation of spiritual phenomena. Near-death experiences or contemplative states are frequently categorized as potential deceptions, creating a reflex of suspicion toward the unknown. If an equal rival to God exists, spiritual life becomes a war against an external threat. Re-examining the nature of this entity requires redrawing the map of spiritual formation and divine sovereignty. Addressing this tension involves looking past fear-based pastoral traditions and returning to the raw data of the biblical text. The construct of a fallen angel is a product of reception history rather than a native biblical reality. The Edenic framework offers a different interpretation. The Satan figure serves as a dual mechanism of pedagogical testing and the personification of the human ego. This framework relies on deconstructing centuries of literary and cultural accumulation using rules of Hebrew grammar. Stripping away these layers allows the underlying biblical data to stand on its own merit. The Hebrew text contains the primary data, specifically in the etymology of the word Satan. In key passages, the word appears with the definite article, ha. A noun with a definite article is a title, not a proper name. Ha-Satan translates to the accuser or the adversary, describing a functional role within a legal context. The Book of Job provides the most detailed evidence of how this office operates. Within the first 2 chapters of Job, this entity appears among the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the divine council, as a member of the heavenly court. The entity acts only within the specific limits set by divine permission. It cannot exceed the boundaries established by God. This earliest data describes a subordinate legal function within God's authority, with no indication of cosmic rebellion. A specific historical path led from a legal office in the divine council to a king of hell. Much of the imagery originates in the Lucifer passages of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. The original literary context identifies these as political taunt songs. They were written to mock the fall of earthly kings in Babylon and Tyre. During the Second Temple period, these texts began to be interpreted through the lens of Persian dualism, which elevated dark forces toward a near-divine status. Medieval art and John Milton's Paradise Lost eventually fixed this composite lore into church dogma. The biography of a fallen angel is an accumulation of historical interpretations, distinct from the claims of the biblical canon. The traditional model presents a logical difficulty, often called the paradox of creation. An omnipotent creator cannot logically bring an equal, autonomous opponent into existence. The presence of a true rival contradicts omnipotence. If the entity operates by permission, it functions as a subordinate part, not a rival power. This leads to the paradox of punishment. In the traditional court, the instigator manages punishment, while victims face the penalty. This structure fails to meet the standards of divine justice. These failures in the traditional model suggest the need for a more coherent alternative. The Edenic Leing presents 2 necessary realities of human existence. The first is paideia, or pedagogical testing. Spiritual maturation requires resistance. Matthew 4:1 contains evidence for this. The Holy Spirit actively drove Jesus into the wilderness to be tested. The wilderness test is a deliberate phase of education within God's sovereign control. The second reality is the personification of the ego. Evil resides in a specific direction rather than an external creature. When Jesus rebukes Peter in Mark 8:33, he addresses an internal drive for self-preservation that resists self-giving love. Satan serves as a cipher for the resistance required for growth and the human orientation that turns away from love. Shifting away from the cosmic rebel waddle changes the daily discipline of faith. The battlefield is internal. It resides in the orientation of the self. Spiritual warfare is the work of metanoia, an internal turning toward love. Whether holding a purified traditional view or the Edenic view, the practical requirement is the redirection of the human heart. Pastoral care shifts from diagnosing attacks to walking alongside individuals during their maturation. At the conclusion of Job's test, he moves from hearing about God to seeing him. Endurance through this resistance, a state called white pain, is the mechanism that leads to direct sight of the divine. Stripping away the medieval layer of fear fortifies faith with precision. This regrounding aligns the Church with the original structure of sovereign design. In this economy, the framework functions entirely toward human maturation.